night and an early morning for you. But speaking of early mornings, we're now joined by Richard Rossow, Senior Advisor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, and Mukesh Aghi, the President of the US-India Strategic Partnership Forum. Gentlemen, appreciate you joining us. Mukesh, coming to you first. Clearly an unexpected result, an unexpected verdict. The exit polls had suggested a picture that was firmly putting the BJP in pole position and, 400 plus for the NDA, but it hasn't turned out that way. How will foreign investors read this victory?
Well, the BJP is still the largest party, and we expect the Prime Minister to come back and form the government. And we expect the reform agenda to continue, because you have to understand, it's not just about political parties coming and going within India. India plays a very strategic role from global geopolitics perspective. It is a country which is going to provide market opportunity as a $4 trillion economy to a $5 trillion economy and growing until 2047 at a much, much larger number. It is a market which basically helps de-risk from China and the supply chain. So the investor sentiment on India is still very strong. It will continue because when you look at the other geographies, they're also in turmoil. And so India provides a sense of growth and opportunity for the US companies itself.
Absolutely. I don't think anyone disputes the fact that India finds itself in a stable position. Growth is looking strong. We just got off a strong Q4 GDP print as well. And the expectation is that the reforms that have, of course, been amplified will continue, and there is likely to be a continuity of policy. Richard, good morning. Many thanks for joining us here. How would you read this result? And look, India has seen tough economic reforms go through when we've had a coalition government in the center. This time around, it is going to be a BJP-led NDA. The BJP unlikely to be a majority party, much lower than the 272 mark. So a coalition in its true essence. What is the expectation that you have now, Richard, of an NDA coalition for the third term of the Modi government?
Yeah, I look at both drivers as well as partners. And when you think about some of the drivers that's really pushed the Modi government in the past to take some of the steps they've taken on announcing Make in India, the GST reforms, things like that, that's not going to change. India has an urgent need to create a lot of jobs, especially low-skilled jobs, for people that are going to be leaving agriculture, moving to cities, looking for formal employment. So I think a lot of reforms related to that are still going to be a front of mind, very much part of the agenda. And also, when you look at the partners, you think about the BJP's work in recent months to try to rebuild a few of the partnerships that had maybe flagged a little bit. The Janata Dal United, which generally hasn't meddled too much in international affairs and major reforms from Delhi, unlike some other regional parties they could have went with. And with the resurgence of the Telugu Desam Party, which I think, in my opinion, is actually the most reform-oriented political party in all of India. So having them part of the coalition, I don't suspect is going to put a brake on some of the aspirations, but the fact that it is a coalition, maybe some of the big ideas they might have had on, for instance, like major reforms to GST, that might get slowed down a little bit. And of course, the concern lingers overhead that, both the JDU and TDP have been in the coalition, out the coalition. They're going to have a very strong string. And if they don't like what's happening in Delhi, the ability to kind of pull that. So we'll be watching that, but you're right. I mean, the Vajpayee government got some big reforms like insurance and things like that. So coalitions can work if all the partners are pulling at the oars at the same time.
Well, as did the UPA coalition, did push ahead with many reforms as well, including that big FDI retail piece that was pending for long. But Mukesh, what in terms of prioritization with the verdict that's come in, what would the expectation be of the next government? We do have that big budget coming up, the full budget that will be presented in July. From a foreign investor's perspective, what are you now going to be watching out for to build on the momentum that we've already seen?
Well, you have to look at it from the foreign investors. They're looking for a sense of stability. They're looking for a sense of transparency. They're looking for a sense of level playing field. And when the new budget comes in, we expect the budget to continue with the reform, managing the deficit, improving on in the banking sector, improving on the reform on the labor side, on the agriculture side. So we basically are expecting the reform agenda to progress much more aggressively. You have to understand, we have to create jobs in India, almost 1 million new jobs a month itself. And you can only create by attracting technology and investment from around the world. And that's going to come in because India becomes a much more better place to invest vis-a-vis other geographies such as China. But more importantly, you have to understand the geopolitics also plays a critical role for India. US companies are basically looking at de-risking from China. And I think as India reforms further, India becomes much more attractive. So we do expect from a US company perspective, the reform agenda to continue. And we expect the US company to keep on investing in India in the mid to short term itself.
Richard, I know that you do a lot of work on Indian states as well, and not just the national election. We've had two crucial state elections as well, where we've seen upsets. We've seen an upset in the state of Odisha with the end of an era really there as far as Naveen Patnaik is concerned as Chief Minister, and for the BJD making way for the BJP. And in Andhra Pradesh, it's the return of Chandrababu Naidu, the man who wooed foreign investors in a big way when he was Chief Minister, man who was on the forefront of digitization and adopting the digital revolution. So Richard, how would you see these state wins and these state changes?
With Andhra, we may see more of a whipsaw, right? Because the last time that the TDP ran the state, talking about redeveloping the capital, a lot of aggressive tendering on renewable energy, and a lot of that got shredded and torn up when the YSR Congress won the state. I suspect, that the Naidu government will go back to its wishes to want to try to rebuild this national capital. It's smart reform, sure, but at the same time, investors like stability, and this back and forth that you see is kind of dangerous. Similar in Odisha. Quietly, Odisha undertook one of the most significant reforms, bar any organization in all of India, by reforming and privatizing the entire power grid, something they tried and failed 30 years before. But the Patnaik government had done it again, and actually it's been a raging success. So just kind of hoping that you've got some level of policy stability, which is something that investors certainly want, not just reform, but stability. But the other angle to it that I wanted to touch on, and one of the areas I think the Modi government with this weakened hand is going to have a real problem with, most reform that has to happen in India is actually at the state level. And some of the work the Modi government had done on challenging states to do better, improving the business environment. Well, when you're in a coalition government and you're ranking states' business environment, what happens if Andhra, what happens if Bihar are at the bottom of the list? Some of those pressures that they felt, even when they didn't have a coalition, on actually challenging states to do better, I think those pressures are going to mount. So a lot of the reform work, I think, at the states have to do. The Delhi government's going to have, the central government's going to have less of a hand in pushing that. That's one reason I have to pause in terms of what we might see post-election.
Yes, but to be fair, all states at this point in time are trying to press ahead and draw in investors, both domestic as well as foreign investors, whether it is, the easy availability of land, all kinds of concessions. There is, in fact, almost a competition on between states on who they can woo and who they can bring onto their own shores. Mukesh, how are investors seeing that? As I said, you've got Tamil Nadu battling it out with Gujarat, Gujarat battling it out with Telangana, Telangana battling it out with Maharashtra, and so on and so forth. At the end of the day, investors benefit because you're going to probably get a much better deal with this competitive federalism underway.
No, absolutely, Shireen. The states have tasted the blood, and they know that if they want to draw investors, if they want to create jobs, if they want to grow their state economy, they have to compete. And we keep on hosting on a monthly basis more and more of state investment delegation coming to the United States. So I believe from a state perspective, anybody who comes in will have to work to draw investments internationally. And for them to draw investment, they have to compete with other states. That means you got to have a much more aggressive package offer to those investors. You got to have a much more transparent policy making. You have to have a much more reform agenda. So I think it's not just about India competing on a global basis. Now it's states competing on a global basis, and that reform agenda continues. And you'll see a much more aggressive stance as the state government take their position in a global order.
Yes, but the next few days are going to be interesting to say the least. First, we need to close today. We need to call the election, which hasn't happened so far, and then the process of staking claim to form government, and then the process of actual government formation, the Council of Ministers, and so on and so forth. Richard, before I let you go, do you expect an even bigger Council of Ministers?
Yeah, I mean, the Modi government had consolidated, given ministers multiple portfolios. That becomes a lot more challenging when you have to hand out a number of other portfolios to coalition partners. So, I suspect it'll get broken up a little bit, and that's a bit unfortunate because there's some natural complementarities on bringing together the Ministry of Power and the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, for instance. So some of these areas there were natural complementarities on having a single minister kind of running both, but such is the nature of coalitions. India is not unique that way. Again, we've seen times in coalition governments that's been a relatively successful model. It all depends on how the boss managed to manage a lot of divergent interests and keep them all moving in the same direction.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we will have to see how all of this plays itself out. Richard Rossow, Mukesh Aghi, always a pleasure for today on the big day for Indian democracy and the big day for our markets, for business and investors. Thanks very much for joining us to decode the election result. Well, what